Yeah, this is my new book here,
Excellent. Finding Our Heart, indeed. Looks beautiful. So we're going to actually begin by having Thomas read from Finding Our Heart, which is the specially written and illustrated for very young people. Thomas, can you please read to us from your new book?
Sure. So Finding Our Heart, a story about the Uluru Statement for young Australians. And the illustrator is Black Douglas, and the cover here is really beautiful. It's embossed and really stands out. Finding Our Heart. For the children who will teach us how to find our collective heart. We live in a big, beautiful country. And we come from many different parts of the world. Together, our nation is called Australia. Before this place was called Australia, we Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were here for thousands and thousands of years. Here's the IATSIS map. We cared for our country, the plants and the animals. We sang, we danced, we worked, we learnt, we shared. We were the first to bake bread, and we invented many ways to live with the land. We have the oldest living culture on the planet. When Captain Cook arrived, our way of life changed, and we were treated badly and ignored. So we protested, and we asked all Australians to listen to us, because we now know our country, because our country is sad, and we need to find our nation's heart to make it better. The Prime Minister, the leader of all Australians, asked us, how do we find the heart of the nation? Many other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all points of the southern sky we showed the Prime Minister how to find the heart of the nation. We started with the truth. The heart of the nation did not come with the ships. It did not grow on the farm. The explorers couldn't find it, though they searched far and wide. It wasn't in the banks or in the ground. Or in the big cities. And it wasn't in the rule book. It's the Constitution. Where is the heart of the nation? The heart of the nation has always been right here. And here in our voices. When we all came together at Uluru, we invited all Australian people to accept our voice and our culture as a gift. We invited everyone to listen to our heart in our songs, see our heart in our dance, learn where our heart is from in our stories and languages, and how we have cared for our environment. We will only find the heart of our nation and make our country better when First Nations voices are heard. Will you help find the heart of the nation? And so that's the book, the story, and then the next 2 pages are a summary of the history, you know, a little bit more, you know, in a more advanced way, but still very basic for maybe slightly older kids to read, or for parents to read and understand as well, or the adult that's reading it, and including a very brief summary of what the Uluru Statement actually calls for in more detail. And then the last 2 or the next 2 pages are how you can help to find our heart. So there's a number of things there that that children and families can do to help, and the Uluru Statement campaign, because it is a campaign. It's a live political document, the Uluru Statement, and the website there that people can go to learn how to support and get more information. And then last of all is the actual words of the Uluru Statement from the heart. And you would have seen the artwork is in the middle of the book, the actual artwork of the Uluru Statement. So that's finding our heart. Yeah. You might be on mute.
I don't think I've ever seen a book for young people like that, and I don't think I've ever read a book like Statement from Finding the Heart of the Nation. So you're really developing something here, Thomas, and I know you begin the book by saying, I didn't know whether I could do it, I wanted to learn how to write, and over the last 3 years, it must have taken you that 3 years to get the confidence to do such a beautiful book, and gee, it's well illustrated. Congratulations to the illustrator too. But at what point did you think, now I'm ready to do this book?
It was the drive of wanting to achieve what the Uluru Statement calls for, really. It was, you know, I believe in this so passionately because, I mean, I come from the union movement. I'm a trade unionist. So I was a wharfie from when I was 17 years old. And I just understand so well that without structure behind a collective of like-minded people, then you just don't have a voice. You know, you're unable to achieve the things that you want to achieve. And so I'm really passionate about the Uluru Statement. You know, not only the voice, but I think truth-telling and agreement-making is really important. But you know, the voice is important, is vital to both of those, which is why it's a priority. You know, I mean, people that are listening to this and watching this, no doubt read a lot, and therefore would know the truth of our history. Because, you know, there's been so much truth-telling in so many history books, great books like Dark Emu now, documentaries, movies. The truth is out there, but we need a voice to be able to use the truth. And so, yeah, I wasn't very confident, but I just knuckled down and did my best.
You did, and obviously enjoyed it. You can tell in the writing that you enjoyed it. And when you say that the people listening, like me, to what you're saying now, and we have read some of the histories, and we have read Dark Emu, but there were stories in this book I'm so grateful, like Rosie's story, like some of the people, the bloke who told you about the 40,000 sheep,
Yeah.
the 40,000, what did you call them? Yeah. You know, there's so many people there whose stories I know I know they sort of get gathered up, but by gathering them up into this book, I think you've actually given me, given the reader a kind of a new history, a new way to hear history, right from the people who are repatriating bones through to the people who are saying, well, what's next? How did you choose? How did you find, how did you decide to who you were going to speak to, whose voices you were going to put in this book?
It was, so I'd never done an interview before in my life, as in interviewing someone and writing about it, or even interviewing someone for anything. And so I had to work out how to do it, and a bit of trial and error. And that was also in in who I interviewed as well. I set myself some criteria, as in I wanted to have gender balance. I wanted to have people from all parts of the country, as much as possible. And so those were the main criteria. They had to be supporters of the Uluru Statement, and they were all people that I'd met along the way, and I already knew of them and their stories somewhat. So, and then it was, a bit of trial and error again. Sometimes people weren't available, or, and I think it's worked out really well. I was worried, actually. The publisher said to me when we first talked about the idea that I should at first I wanted to do 30 interviews was my idea. It was going to be much more photographic and less writing. And the reason why I wanted to do around 30 was to cover more of the areas around the country. And they said, be lucky, be thankful, or we'd be happy if you can get 9 interviews done. And in the end, I've ended up doing 20. And so it became easier as I did it. And I was surprised that when I started writing, once I found the hardest part opening the piece, you know, like finding something nice to start it with. But then once I started working on putting the story together and the narrative behind it, I found that much easier, just because it was such a great experience, and I really enjoyed the people and their places. So the interviews, it was a great experience to write, and I did enjoy it.
I think when you look at the map, finally, I mean, you read through all these places and you're going here and there. At one point, you say you're exhausted, and then off you go again to another one, and then you see the map, and it's a real shock, I think, to see how much you've travelled. Yeah, and the map in there too is thanks for putting that in. The that's the other. Yeah, show us the map.
I'll see if I can find it quickly. The map of where I went around the statement. Sorry. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah. Look at it.
Unfortunately, and that has. I've been to many more places since sharing the Uluru, trying to get people to join the People's Movement, which has been successful somewhat, because in October 2017, Malcolm Turnbull completely dismissed the Uluru Statement, and now we're in a position where the doors. There is a model. There are options for models of a voice being designed, and we're yet to convince the government to commit to constitutionally enshrining the voice, which is the main part. If you don't constitutionally enshrine it and you only enact it through Parliament, then it will be destroyed like every other representative body. So constitutional enshrinement is really important, and it also goes to addressing our history, including First Nations from the Constitution in 1901 on the basis of us being a dying race was a huge mistake. It was wrong, and recognising us in the Constitution through a substantive reform, a voice, which is more than symbolism, is the way to do it.
I learnt through this that there's a great deal of misinformation being put out, you know, because you use the word voice, and of course it's the voice through the Constitution. It's pretty simple, isn't it, really, what's being asked for, but the confusion, I think, throws most people who go, oh, I don't know what they're asking for. So it's the clarity, and that's why it's so impressive to see that kids' book. The clarity there is pretty straightforward. Why do you think, this is a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, Thomas, why do you think people are confusing the message?
I think it's because of some leaders of the nation have purposely sought to confuse people about it, you know, saying it was a third chamber to Parliament was wrong. It's a representative body that will give advice directly to Parliament. That's not vetoing any legislation or anything like that, because we know that's impossible. You know, it's not that Indigenous people wouldn't like that sort of power over their own affairs, but we know that that's not going to succeed. But there is power in a representative body, as I mentioned earlier, the power of unity and that structure to be able to then use that voice to hold politicians more accountable, which is why some of the politicians, you know, oppose this, because they don't want to be held more accountable. And of course they'd be afraid to be held accountable about Indigenous affairs. They've made, you know, they've just totally failed and really been damaging and quite destructive, rather than being, improving the situation. And the only way you change that is with a voice. So, but it is quite simple in that it's simply a representative body. And what that looks like, well, there's lots of representative bodies, you know, and the representative body itself would be legislated as in how it is constituted. because that would need to evolve, you know, like institutions evolve, and you can't constitutionalize the model. But it's simply enshrining it so it can't be taken away, so that it is the rule of the nation, that there'll always be a voice in the decisions made in this country.
One of the things you start with and you come back to is that feeling when the convention, you know, it's 250 people, I think, about, what was it, the convention, and the feeling that you all had of optimism and hope, which goes right through the book. So can you describe for us again what that felt like when the vote came through and the signing happened 3 years ago now?
Oh, it was just an incredible moment. Geez, I mean, we'd been through 13 regional dialogues. You know, I'd only been to the Darwin one and a couple of others as an observer in the Torres Strait and the Brisbane dialogue. But you know, all the passionate debates, and you know, and also having to convince ourselves to suspend our disbelief for these dialogues, right? Because it's not that Indigenous people haven't been consulted before. It's that when you're consulted, you know, nothing that you say is implemented, sort of thing. So we were asked in these processes to suspend our disbelief and put some proposals forward as if we could achieve them. And then at Uluru itself, you know, high tension, you know, because we're like any human group of people, you know, almost 270 people, 250 endorsed it, you know, because, you know, around 20 of the participants walked out, which is, you know, one of the things that led to this this crescendo, I suppose, you know, this special moment. And again, that's normal, you know, we're not 100%, you know, it dehumanises Indigenous people to think that we're going to not have such debates and factions form. But 250 out of 270, you know, when Professor Megan Davis, a Cobble woman, public law expert, an Indigenous member of the referendum council that ran this process, she read the Uluru statement. Just the entire room stood as one and endorsed it with standing acclamation. And there wasn't one amendment, you know, like, can you imagine, you know, but we're talking about the rule book of the nation, no less, after all that Indigenous people have been through, after such a long process, after, you know, a few people walked out the day before, and endorsing this statement without any amendment. We just got it so right, you know, and people were crying, you know, crying tears of joy and hope. People that were in passionate debate against one another were just embracing and with such joy. It was a really special moment.
And then, of course, Malcolm Turnbull backed out, which we've got
the main barrier, right? I mentioned in the conclusion, Arnie Pat Anderson, you know, one of the elders of this movement, said that the politicians would always be the barrier to this, and she was right. That's why the Uluru Statement is written to the Australian people, not the politicians this time. We have to convince them.
It seems to be the way a lot of things are happening now. We almost need to sidestep them and then allow them to catch up. I'm thinking when you said about the practicality of this statement, Jaja Warring in Bendigo in the Central Victorian region, Rodney Carter heading up that corporation, he often talks about the practicality and of also the sharing. And I was impressed through the book of the number of people you spoke to who were willing to bring non-Indigenous people with you and to allow them to, because it's a huge feeling when you see an audience of people listening to Bruce Pascoe. It's a huge feeling of sharing, and a good feeling, and of course then it enables you to do your work as well. The optimism, though, must have been even surprising for you, the hope and optimism that you found as you travelled around.
Yeah, absolutely. That exists in, you know, there were two things in common for everybody that I interviewed in the book. And that is that all of them experienced racism, you know, in some way or form, you know, in the effects of, you know, their childhood as well, through to the present date. But all of them have hope. You know, every one of these stories talk about those, the heartbreak and all that, but they all have hope. And, you know, and you talk about the sharing and the generosity of Indigenous people. If you look at all the way through the history of our struggle, the petitions and statements before the Uluru Statement, and there's many, the Akala Bark petitions, you know, the Day of Mourning back in the 30s, the Larrakia petition to the Queen, Barunga Statement, every time they are always generous, practical, reasonable proposals, you know, and they've all been dashed against the rocks of political expediency. But again, the Uluru Statement is, you know, is about bringing the nation together. It is a very generous and uniting statement, and but it learns the lessons from the past, and it asks the Australian people this time, not a king or a queen or a member of parliament.
The language thing. Remember the story in it? Of course you do. But the story about the woman who's being who's saying, "Oh, you don't even speak, you know, an Aboriginal language. You're not a real Aborigine." But then it's explained to her that, well, no, because my grandparents were told that if they spoke an Indigenous language, they'd be punished. And it was like this penny dropped in this woman's head, and she, oh, okay. So there's a lot of that in your book. There's a lot of lessons, aren't there, to be learned?
Yeah, I think there is. You know, I was worried when that's where I was going before. I lost my track, but I was worried when I was interviewing, when I started to interview so many people, you know, ended up with, you know, 20 interviews done, and I, you know, had to write it all up and all that. I was worried that their stories would be too similar. And repetitive, perhaps, and all this you know, joyful and hopeful stuff was coming through as well. So I started to think two things. I thought, you know, these two alike, and people will get bored. And secondly, with all this hope and everything in here, so many good stories. I was wondering, you know, are people not going to get as you know, feel it in their heart as much, you know, without so many sad, you know, as many sad stories as I was expecting. But I think it's really, I think it's I want to say perfect, but it's obviously not perfect, but it's really good, you know, the spread of stories. Yeah.
They're sad stories, but they're told with humour. That's one of the, except maybe at the core of the book, and I think I'm really glad it's in there, but it's certainly a moment that clenches the heart, is the intervention, and John Howard's intervention that affected those communities at the heart of the nation.
Yeah, Barb Shaw from Alice Springs, Mount Brumby Town Camp, is one of the interviewees, and she talks about that. She was one of the main a leader of the fight against in Central Australia. And Sammy Wilson as well, whose name is Chum Uluru, the last interview, talks about how the reason why his community, you know, and that lives in the, you know, right at the base of the rock, basically, Mutijulu, so gave the name Uluru to the campaign and the statement, is because they don't want to see something like the intervention happen again, where the army rolled into their tiny community, completely disempowered them, without a stronger voice to stand up against it.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting place to finish, to more or less finish on the stories, because you go back to Uluru and you look at the rock. There are crevices. It's beautiful. It's very physical, isn't it? Which we come back to that idea that that a lot of the book is you physically. I mean, you must have gone places that you never dreamed you were going to go, really.
It's just such a great opportunity, and we had no money for the campaign when Uluru was done and the Referendum Council handed down their final report. It was almost immediately dismissed, so there was no support to get out there and teach people about what had happened at Uluru. Not even our own people, you know, back in our communities, there wasn't the support to do it. And I was fortunate that my union, the Maritime Union, didn't hesitate to support my travels. Auntie Pat Anderson, one of the elders, approached Paddy Crumlin, our National Secretary, and asked if I could be lent to the movement, basically, and he didn't hesitate, and they covered my airfares and accommodation as I travelled around and did this. And just really lucky, and that's where the author royalties go for that reason, because I couldn't accept any financial gain for this. It's about the movement, and every cent goes to the campaign.
And of course that takes us back to Wave Hill, which again, I just said the intervention was a core moment in the book, but so is the memories of Wave Hill, which it's a beautiful way to be reminded, and to see this, the way the gathering of Indigenous people has empowered them, and not to be it's a pretty salutary lesson. You must be very proud of the union movement.
Oh, absolutely. Our history, our part in those struggles like the Wave Hill walk-off, and unions, like any human organisation, have their problems from time to time, just like the Voice will, a representative body of Indigenous people like ATSIC had problems. But you deal with the problem. You have reviews, and you amend the way that you do things, and but collectives of people is so important. And if you oppress, the ability for people to, especially people that are otherwise powerless, you're heading in the wrong direction as a nation. And so they're very important.
It's reminded me of that there was a lot of misinformation came out about ATSIC, wasn't there?
There was, and it was actually a very purposeful thing. It was a tactic. John Howard was very good at divide and conquer, and he certainly opposed, collectives of people that would hold government to account. I mean, the misinformation, the demonisation of what was at ATSIC, instead of dealing with the issue, and there was a review that was done, actually. The review was never implemented because it was destroyed. ATSIC was destroyed before it could be. The problems should be dealt with. And so the tactic was the same as with the wharfies in 1998. I was a wharfie in 1998. I was 21 years old, barely, not even 21 years old yet when it all happened. And but when the 1998 Patrick's dispute happened, and Howard colluding with the Patrick stevedores, moved in the middle of the night and dragged us away from our jobs and our livelihoods. There was a long period of demonisation of wharfies, and unfair as well. And that's the same what he did to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in ATSIC. And, that's one of the reasons why we learn we need to constitutionally enshrine this voice, so that it can defend itself. Fortunately, the union was able to defend itself, but we were so well established, and a lot of the community supported us because of what we've done with social justice.
When I thought to speak with you, Thomas, I thought, I better ask him about himself. And then, of course, reading the book, I discovered that there's a chapter which gives your history. I got a funny feeling the publisher made you do that.
Yeah, I didn't do that. I had, it was all dragged out of me. Told you must write about yourself, and it was an interesting experience writing about myself. If you've ever done it, it's challenging and not something I ever expected to do. What I really learnt out of that, though, and people that have done it would understand this, that I felt like I didn't have a story to tell. I didn't, as about my own journey before the Uluru Statement, and when you write it down, you find out, well, everything, all those little things that I did, all those things that I didn't think would ever amount to something, actually form a narrative. It forms a story that people are interested in, and so that's the advice I'll give my kids now. Don't feel like if you're just cleaning in a hostel or something, that's the job you're doing, that's meaningless. It all adds up to something. It's all part of your experience.
I was going to ask you about the kids, because that gorgeous thing where the arm fart noises, and also where you finish. Again, how do you feel? The kids are brief within it. Your children are mentioned, but not. You don't do too much about that. How do they feel about being part of your book?
They love it. Yeah, especially the little ones. They were so proud when we launched the book. They were signing books and everything, and they love it. A really touching way to end the book. I thought the little thing that happened there when I was writing it, a young fella comes up. I think he was only 6 or 7 at the time, and asked what the name of the book is going to be, and I tell him, I ask him, that's right, I ask him, what do you want to call the book? And he says, does the arm farts as little kids do? I say, Finding the Heart of the Nation, and he says, with a confused look, where is the heart of the nation? And that's where I put my hand on his heart and I say, the heart of the nation is right here, which is the idea for the children's book, really.
Exactly. I was about to say, so therefore from there I can see why you, and that gorgeous thing about it's not in the ground, it's not in the bank. I was chuckling with that. It's did you have to work very hard on the text for that? The illustrations are gorgeous, but how did you find writing the text?
Oh, it was. I didn't find it, well, compared to writing 260 pages of a big book. Yeah, no, I found it much easier. Hardy Grant were a great publisher, lots of support, a great children's editor, Christina Skoltz. Yeah, so it was a much easier project.
Has it gone out into the world, the book, because it's an odd time to be and obviously it's not going out and about into schools, but I suspect there'll be a next wave for you of maybe appearances going out to schools and things once things settle. Yeah,
well, I was touring with the first book, and any chance I get to talk to people and teach them about the Uluru Statement, that's a great opportunity that the book gives me further opportunity to do. The book comes out on the 1st of June, the children's one, Finding Our Heart, and it's available for pre-order now on pretty much all of the online bookshops as well. Should be in all of your bookshops. If it's not, ask why not, and tell them to put it on the shelf.
Listen to you. You're getting into that marketing. Absolutely.
Organizer, I'm organised.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's so please, consider getting it for your schools and kids and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Finally, thanks so much for joining us. And after 3 years of travel around, can you tell me what happens now to the canvas?
The canvas is at the University of New South Wales in Sydney with Professor Megan Davis, and as I mentioned, it's a live political document. It hasn't been killed off by the government. We're going to keep it out there until we achieve what it calls for. It doesn't travel as much. I don't travel with it anymore because it is a sacred object and quite fragile. It's starting to fray a little bit by the time I finish with it, 18 months on the road. And I imagine it, and I hope that it will end up back in Mutitjulu, in where Uluru is, and where basically it all began.
You nearly left it behind at one stage.
Yes, it was. Yeah, that's why I felt like I lost an arm or a leg when I handed it back over, but it was quite a responsibility to carry that around the country.
You must have been very tired at that stage when you nearly left it behind and a motel person said, Mr. Mayor, that thing that you've been carrying around. Thomas, thank you so much. It's been terrific to talk to you, really good, and I'm really keen to see what happens with the children's book. It's a well done. Congratulations on it. And I hope to hear some more, and I hope to hear that the voice does keep gathering momentum. Good luck with it.
Thank you, and look up the website www.ulurustatement.org if you want more information and how to join the campaign. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.